Hey there, welcome to First Look. Thanks for being here this week. This is Holy Week. You've made it, and there's a lot going on. So let me start by first just talking a little bit about how this past Sunday went, and it was another one of those kind of special Sundays to be there. Um, we had Palm Sunday, obviously. But we would go from that palm story to the passion story. So the way the service starts is that we start with the parade of palms and all glory, laud, and honor, that kind of classic hymn. And then it pivots into the passion story. And that's chanted and sung, and there's music, and it's a beautiful way of kind of bringing us into the week. And so we go from there into, of course, Maundy, Thursday, which we'll be celebrating with our friends in the 319 churches, and then we'll be hosting the Good Friday service, and then Easter. And so I thought today I'll kind of cover a little bit of what we'll be doing on Good Friday, and then moving into the Easter story. So the first part is Good Friday, and we'll be doing that in a tenebrae style. So kind of a darkening, right? Ever-present darkening. And so this will be focused not on the passion story, but on kind of a grieving and lament. So the readings that we'll be doing are Psalms, like Psalm 22. The choir will do, but then the readings come from like Lamentations 1:10 through 14, and chapter 3, 1 through 9. And the context for Lamentations is the lament over the exile. So this is an Old Testament book that is that we're reflecting on that kind of loss. So it looks at loss as specifically as that. And I think that one of the powerful things about that lament is just that it's personal, but it's also kind of communal. And there's this communal element to it, that we've all lost kind of, not just one thing, but we've kind of lost who we are. We've kind of lost our identity. And that's a big piece that I think we kind of try to plant as much as we can on Good Friday, that this is the loss of a person, but it's also a loss of a sense of who we are, right? This isn't just something that we are hoping for that stops. It's now we have to begin to rethink everything. But then, of course, what we see on Sunday is the answer to how we do rethink everything. And so that's the part that I think is so fascinating, that we spend all of this time in reflection, and then we recognize very slowly from Thursday to Friday that everything that was hoped for, it now has to be put down. And now we've kind of gone into this time of sorrow and in coming to terms with that. But then God provides the answer, right, on Sunday. So let me go then and so let's spend most of our time looking at the Easter story, since that is for this Sunday. So that is we're in the Luke or the Luke Gospel for this year. Let me get down to that. Oh, it's Luke 24. That's what it is. So give me a second to get to Luke 24. And if you remember, every time we tell the Easter story, of course, what's going to happen is that we're going to look at it from a very different type of angle. And what I mean by that is that it's told slightly differently in each gospel. Um, but I think what you find in the telling and retelling of the resurrection story is that you get kind of a compiling together of what I think we're supposed to gather from the story, recognizing that like it's eyewitness accounts of something that miraculous that happened, and so it's kind of being pieced together from Mark to Luke to John. You have all of these players who are there trying to figure out what happened and how this transpired. So this is the resurrection story. Again, Luke 24 verses 1 through 12. So you can just kind of follow along if you'd like. Here we go. But on the first day of the week, at early dawn, they came to the tomb, taking the spices they had prepared. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they went in, they did not find the body. While they were perplexed about this, suddenly two men in dazzling clothes stood beside them. The women were terrified and bowed their faces to the ground, but the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He's not here, but has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee that the Son of Man must be handed over to sinners and be crucified, and on the third day rise again." Then they remembered his words, and returning from the tomb, they told all this to the 11 and to all the rest. Now it was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the other women with them who told this to the apostles. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. But Peter got up and ran to the tomb. Stooping and looking in, he saw the linen clothes by themselves. Then he went home amazed at what had happened. So the sermon title is An Idle Tale. And I think part of the reason that I thought originally to call the sermon that was because I think because of how many times we've heard the story. You hear it just like all these people did. And at first you think, I don't know what is that? I don't know what you're even saying, right? Not that they thought that the people were lying, but like, I don't know that you're telling me something that I'm supposed to be reacting to. Like almost like they needed more information. There was no proof. I'm not sure that they thought that they believed them, but like maybe they thought they were confused or they got it wrong. They didn't react right away. It wasn't instantly amazing. It wasn't instantly, we need to do something, react to this, go somewhere, be somewhere, do something. And so they just kind of stood idly by. But then Peter has the thought, what if this were true? And even if it's not true, isn't it worth me going down there and checking? Because if it's not true, nothing changes. But if it is true, everything changes. And I thought about that, especially as I'm kind of getting ready for Friday and putting that together, thinking of the lamenting part, and been thinking a lot about the moments in life where you have to figure out what to do now. Everything changes. What do you do now? You have to completely recalibrate. And sometimes that happens because something bad happens. Sometimes it happens because something good happens. You graduate from something, or you get married, or you have a child, or you move, or for a new promotion or something, or there's there's a death, or there's a loss of some sort, or you lose a job or something, right? All those things can happen, and you start to think, what do I do now? Where do I go from here? And the answer that Jesus gives in the resurrection doesn't set them back on the same course that they were on, which I think is important for us to remember. The disciples thought they understood where Jesus was headed. But then he started talking about resurrection and dying and all of that, and they got confused. And so the fact that this happened, again, we say it very often, they weren't ready for. You can argue maybe they should have been, but they weren't ready for. This was not a reality that they were all expecting. They weren't sitting around looking at their watches, trying to figure out exactly when Jesus was going to return. They were expecting that everything that they had worked for and everything that they had done would collapse. And there was no reason in their minds to think otherwise. And then all of a sudden, here he is. And everything that they still thought was true was still gone. But Jesus is there, and so now that was going to mean something new. So the feelings that they had that everything they knew was gone still continued to be true, even with the appearance of Jesus. But his re-emerging in their lives meant they had to start from scratch. They knew this person. They knew what he meant. But now we're talking about resurrection. Now we're talking about eternal life. Now we're talking about something else, right? This wasn't even Lazarus. You remember the Lazarus story. This wasn't that either. Because now it was a sense that we wipe everything clean and everything starts again. And I think that that's still really scary. And I think that's the part of it that I try to ponder and try to get my head around often, is that there isn't anything about the story that's comforting. It's joyous, right? I mean, you're happy. Even if you don't know what this means, you're still happy that it's happening. But it's not just business as usual. And I think that's the part that in some ways is easy for us to get our minds around, and in other ways is hard. And what I mean by that is that it's easy to get your head around because we have always known Jesus to be resurrected, right? There was no before time or after. It's just always been true for us. We always have this story in retrospect. So we don't have to recalibrate in that way. But we do have to recalibrate in the sense that every time we get to Easter, every time we think about Christ's story, it should compel us to see ourselves and see the world differently. That whatever we have taken for granted, that we can't anymore. That we should continue to reinvest, right? To reconcile things that we have left kind of dormant. It should mean something new about us. And, otherwise it is an idle story. Because then it doesn't change anything, right? I mean, that's the whole idea, is that this should change something. And so every time we tell it, if you're willing to hear it, if you're willing to show up, if you're willing to put on the Easter clothes and come out for the service, or experience the service online, or however you're going to do it, if you're willing to have that story told to you again, and you're willing to hear it and receive it, then that means it's kind of contractual, right? You have to be willing to do something new now, because that's exactly what the disciples were signing up for. If Jesus, imagine this for a second. Say Jesus is resurrected. They see that he's resurrected. And they all said, okay, now that we know that you are, we're done. I think we're done. We've gone as far as we can go. Someone else needs to take over now, right? Then that would have been them kind of saying, we've gotten this as far as we need to. Like we're washing our hands of it. But they say, okay, tell us the next thing to do, right? They become the church. They build the church. And then Paul comes along and they negotiate with Paul how they're going to spread this word. All of that happens. And so that means that they are made new also, right? They begin with the all things in common church. They try to make that work because they recognize that whatever it is that they're going to build, especially as Jesus ascends, is going to have to look completely different than it did before. And I'm sure that brought with it a whole bunch of fear and a whole bunch of anxiety and a whole bunch of, there's no blueprint for this. That was the biggest difference, is that as Jesus was alive before the resurrection, they were kind of retooling an old blueprint. Rise to power, move the people who are in power now, move them out, claim the throne, get this thing going again. Same old system, right? New players, better players, same system. What Jesus was advocating, though, for was a complete stripping of the system, right? Nothing was going to be the same. Nothing about it would be as it was. That's why he kept talking about the kingdom of God, right? Not just, where we're headed, not like a new path, not like a destination, but like what we are supposed to be ushering in. This isn't it, but we can create it together. We can strive for it together. And part of me feels like that the interesting thing about going from Good Friday to Easter, meaning from a reading standpoint, to go from those laments, the Lamentations, to Luke, is that the laments were lamenting what had been. And whenever Jerusalem was rebuilt, they came back from exile, it was rebuilt. The people were different. But they reestablished a lot of the same things. They just sort of did it with a new vantage point. They tried to take the Torah, they tried to take the lessons that they had forgotten and reapply them, right? Faithfully. That's what they were being led to do. And this was different than that. But the people still lamented what was. They always went back to what was and what could have been, and honored the people who came before them to do that. And it's interesting to think about, when that came around again. When the anniversary of Good Friday came around for the first time. And Jesus had ascended and they were establishing this church and whatever. I wonder I wonder what that first one was like. You know, did they take stock again? Did they do their own kind of Lent? You know, did they ask for forgiveness? Did they, you know, what was that like? I don't know. But I do know in my heart it's that they knew that whoever they were on that Good Friday, you know, when it happened, when Jesus is crucified, they could never be those people again. They would never again be the people who they were, you know, with Zacchaeus and the Last Supper and all that. Like they would never be those people. They couldn't possibly be. They had to be completely different folks. And I think that's kind of what we hope happens in Easter, is that we don't leave it as an idle story, but that we strive to find something new. So that's kind of where I am for this week, just kind of taking it in. So I know that Holy Week and Easter is a lot, you know, physically, emotionally, spiritually, all those things. But I hope that it's something that really resonates with you. There's lots of information that you need about Thursday and Friday and things to bring and things to do and things to RSVP for. I hope that you'll look at all that information that we've sent you, that will email you, that will remind you, all those things. But for now, I just want to thank you for doing this. I hope you have a very blessed Holy Week. And I will see you next time for another First Look. So take care.